The sterile antiseptic scent of the Sterling Vanguard Medical Center's executive wing was a constant, a chemical blanket meant to soothe the fears of the wealthy and powerful. It was a smell of clean linens, polished chrome, and money, a perfume designed to mask the underlying odor of sickness and mortality. In this rarefied air, Nurse Elara Vance moved like a ghost, a whisper of white scrubs and quiet efficiency. She was a study in controlled motion, her steps measured and silent on the gleaming marble floors, her presence so unobtrusive that she often seemed to melt into the serene beige-toned walls. Her colleagues saw a woman of profound, almost unnerving, professionalism. Her charts were immaculate, her dosage calculations flawless, her bedside manner a perfect blend of detached compassion and clinical precision. She spoke only when necessary, her voice soft and low, a stark contrast to the often brittle energy of the ward. They saw her, but they did not truly see her. They saw the slight, almost imperceptible limp in her left leg, which she dismissed with a wave of her hand as the lingering souvenir of a foolish car accident in her youth. They saw the long, pale scar that snaked up her right forearm, a line of puckered tissue she claimed came from a mishap with a hot oven during a baking experiment gone wrong. These were plausible stories, mundane explanations for minor imperfections on an otherwise stoic canvas. Her hair, a practical shade of brown, was always pulled back in a severe, tight bun, revealing a face that was pleasant but intentionally forgettable. Her eyes, a deep and startling grey, were the only feature that hinted at something more. They were ancient eyes, holding a stillness that seemed at odds with her presumed 30-something years. They observed everything, catalogued details with an unnerving accuracy, from the faint tremor in a surgeon's hand to the subtle shift in a patient's breathing pattern. For 3 days, she had been assigned to the wing's most notable occupant, General Marcus Valerius. He was a man carved from granite and fury, a living legend in military circles, now grounded by the treachery of his own body. A complex spinal surgery had left him caged in a high-tech hospital bed, his command reduced to the nurse's call button. He was a difficult patient, accustomed to giving orders, not taking them. He barked at the residents, questioned the specialists, and treated the entire medical establishment as a hostile force to be interrogated and subdued. Yet with Elara, he was different. Her silence seemed to absorb his frustration, her calm efficiency a wall against which his anger broke and dissipated. She never flinched from his temper, never rushed, never offered platitudes. She simply did her job with a focus that was absolute, her hands moving with a fluid economy that was almost hypnotic as she changed his dressings, adjusted his monitors, and administered his medications. The first hint of the woman beneath the uniform had come on her second day. A code blue had blared through the wing, a sudden, panicked shriek of electronics that sent a jolt of adrenaline through the staff. A visiting diplomat in the adjacent suite had gone into anaphylactic shock. As nurses scrambled and a young doctor fumbled with a crash cart, Elara had moved. She did not run. She flowed. Her movement was a singular, unbroken line of purpose from the nurse's station to the patient's room. She entered the chaotic scene, and for a moment it was as if a bubble of pure calm had expanded around her. Her grey eyes took in the entire situation in a single, sweeping glance, the patient's cyanotic lips, the swelling tongue, the discarded tray of food containing shellfish, the doctor's trembling hands struggling to draw epinephrine into a syringe. She did not speak. She simply took the ampule and syringe from the doctor's grasp, her fingers closing over his with a gentle but undeniable firmness. In a sequence of movements too fast to properly follow, she snapped the glass, drew the fluid, expelled the air, and administered the intramuscular injection into the patient's thigh. The entire process took less than 3 seconds. She then stepped back, her face unreadable, melting into the background as the diplomat's breathing eased and the crisis subsided. The head of cardiology, who had arrived moments later, took credit for the save, and Elara let him. She returned to her duties as if nothing had happened, the quiet nurse once more. There were other signs, small tells that would have been invisible to anyone not trained to look for them. When she helped Lance Corporal Evans, a young Marine recovering from a double amputation down the hall, with his new prosthetics, she had spoken about the technology with an engineer's fluency. She had pointed out a potential weakness in the gyroscopic stabilizer of his left leg, a flaw the manufacturer's own technician had missed. She organized her medical supply cart not just for convenience, but for tactical access. Every tool was placed for a right-handed draw, syringes were arranged in rows like ammunition, gauze pads stacked like magazines. IV bags hung with their ports facing outward for rapid deployment. It was the meticulous, obsessive organization of someone who understood that seconds could mean the difference between life and death, a mindset forged in an environment far more demanding than a hospital ward. But no one noticed. To them, she was just Nurse Vance, the quiet, competent one, reliable, forgettable. The catalyst for the breaking of this carefully constructed peace was a man for whom appearances were everything. Mr. Aldrich Thorne was the hospital administrator, a creature of expensive suits, gleaming cufflinks, and a smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. He managed Sterling Vanguard not as a place of healing, but as a luxury brand, a 5-star hotel for the infirm. His primary concern was not the health of the patients, but the satisfaction of the hospital's donors. He prowled the executive wing like a predator, sniffing out any imperfection that might tarnish the institution's pristine reputation and, by extension, his own. He believed people were assets or liabilities, and he categorized his staff with ruthless efficiency. Elara Vance, in his mind, was a liability, too quiet, too plain. A functional cog that lacked the performative, effusive charm he preferred in his nurses. Thorne's attack came without warning. He was escorting a potential benefactor, a tech billionaire with a perpetually bored expression, on a tour of the VIP facilities. They paused outside General Valerius's suite, just as Elara was exiting, having completed her morning rounds. Thorne's eyes, sharp and critical, scanned the area and landed on a single, minuscule drop of clear liquid on the polished floor, a stray drip of saline from an IV bag adjustment. To anyone else, it was nothing. To Thorne, it was a declaration of war on his immaculate world. His voice, a reedy, piercing thing, cut through the quiet hum of the ward. Nurse Vance, what is this? He did not point. He gestured with a flick of his chin, a gesture of profound contempt. Elara paused and looked down. It appears to be saline, Mr. Thorne. I will clean it immediately. Her voice was even, betraying no emotion. This placid response only seemed to fuel his fury. His face flushed a blotchy red, He was performing for his audience, the billionaire, and needed a villain for his little drama. You will clean it? This is the executive wing, not some county clinic. Our patrons expect perfection. This is sloppiness. This is incompetence. He stepped closer, invading her personal space, his voice dropping to a loud conspiratorial whisper that carried easily down the corridor. I have had my eye on you, Vance. You lack the polish, the engagement, required for this level of care. You drift about like a spectre. Our patients need warmth, not this. He waved a dismissive hand at her entire being. Perhaps you are simply not cut out for the pressures of a premier institution. Inside his room, General Valerius heard every word. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. He knew the petty tyrannies of bureaucrats, the strutting peacocks who mistook authority for ability. He had seen men like Thorne his entire career, in the Pentagon, in supply depots, in the offices of congressmen. They were a species of parasite that thrived in the safety of systems built by better men. He started to press the call button, to verbally eviscerate the administrator, but something stopped him. Through the partially open door, he saw the nurse's reaction. She did not shrink. She did not flush with shame or anger. She simply stood there, her stillness absolute, her grey eyes fixed on Thorne's face. She absorbed his tirade as a sea cliff absorbs a wave, utterly unmoved. This was not the reaction of a frightened employee. It was the reaction of someone who had faced far, far worse, and deemed this man, this moment, to be utterly insignificant. The general slowly released the button, a flicker of profound curiosity piercing his pain-fogged mind. Your performance is under review. Thorne spat, delivering his closing salvo. I assure you, we will be re-evaluating your suitability for continued employment at Sterling Vanguard. Now, clean up your mess. He turned his back on her, his smarmy smile returning as he steered the billionaire down the hall, resuming his tour as if he had just tidied away a minor piece of litter. Elara watched him go, her expression unchanged. Then, with the same deliberate grace she applied to all her tasks, she procured a sanitizing wipe from her pocket, knelt down, and cleaned the single drop of saline from the floor. The professional fallout was as swift and petty as Thorne's initial outburst. A formal letter of reprimand appeared in her file by noon, citing gross negligence and unprofessional conduct. She was placed on immediate probationary status, a move designed to humiliate and encourage a quiet resignation. Thorne wanted her gone, and he was using the full, crushing weight of the hospital's bureaucracy to make it happen. Elara read the letter in the staff break room, her face a mask of placid acceptance. Her colleagues offered whispered condolences, their eyes darting nervously towards the administrator's office. They knew an injustice when they saw one, but they also knew the futility of fighting a man like Aldrich Thorne. Elara simply folded the letter, placed it in her locker, and prepared for her night shift. She did not complain. She did not argue. She just worked, her quiet diligence a silent act of defiance. Thorne saw her continued presence as an affront, her stoicism as weakness, and it hardened his resolve to be rid of her. That evening, the world outside the hospital seemed to mirror the brewing conflict within. A savage thunderstorm rolled in from the coast, clawing at the city with gale-force winds and torrential rain. The lights of Sterling Vanguard flickered once, twice, then held steady as the massive backup generators roared to life in the sub-basement. The transition was seamless, a testament to the hospital's expensive infrastructure. But in the quiet of the executive wing's nurses' station, Elara noticed something the automated systems had missed. On the bank of security monitors, the feed for Corridor C, the hallway leading directly to General Valerius's suite, had gone dark. It was not a flicker. It was a flat, dead black screen. It lasted for precisely 90 seconds. Then the image returned, crisp and clear. The hallway was empty. An icy stillness settled over Elara. 90 seconds. It was a lifetime. It was a perfectly executed system breach, long enough to bypass a maglock or disable a secondary alarm, short enough to be dismissed by a casual observer as a minor glitch in the power transfer. Her training, buried for years under layers of routine and civilian life, screamed at her. Her heart rate did not spike. Instead, it seemed to slow, each beat a heavy, deliberate thump in the sudden silence of her mind. Her senses expanded, the ambient hum of the hospital fading into the background as she focused on the subtle cues of a changing environment. Then, she saw them. On the newly restored camera feed, 3 men in dark blue orderly uniforms appeared at the far end of the corridor. She had never seen them before. That, in itself, was not unusual. The hospital used a variety of third-party contract staff. But their movement was all wrong. They did not walk with the weary shuffle of overworked orderlies. They moved with a predatory grace, their steps synchronized, their bodies angled to minimize their profiles. They stayed close to the wall, flowing from one shadow to the next. They carried long, heavy-duty laundry bags, but they held them incorrectly, the weight clearly centered and solid, not dispersed like bundled linens. Their hands did not swing freely at their sides. They were held close to their torsos, ready. They were stacked in a tactical formation, the point man's eyes scanning high, the second man covering the left, the third covering the right. They were not orderlies. They were a fire team, a hit squad. And they were moving towards the room of a 4-star general who was a key witness in an upcoming international tribunal. In that moment, Nurse Elara Vance ceased to exist. The quiet, gentle caregiver was stripped away like a molted skin, revealing the woman beneath. The change was terrifying to behold, had anyone been watching. Her posture straightened, the slight slump of the weary nurse vanishing, replaced by the rigid, coiled readiness of a predator. The subtle limp in her leg disappeared. Her soft, forgettable face hardened into a mask of cold, lethal purpose, her grey eyes turning the color of slate, flat and hard and deep. She reached into the pocket of her scrubs, and her fingers bypassed the pens and the gauze, closing around the cold, familiar shape of a pair of trauma shears. It was a simple medical tool, designed for cutting through clothing and bandages. In her hand, the polished steel gleamed like a dagger. She did not reach for the panic button on the wall. A panic button brought disorganized, frightened security guards who would be dead before they unholstered their weapons. A panic button was a victim's tool. She was not a victim. She moved from behind the nurse's station, her rubber-soled shoes making no sound on the floor. A ghost of a different sort now, a spectre of violence, and flowed towards the threat. The first mercenary, the point man, was confident, his senses dulled by the ease of their infiltration. He saw her step out from an alcove ahead, and his mind registered her instantly. Female, nurse, small, no threat. He raised a hand. a silent command for her to stay put, a cruel smile touching his lips. He expected her to freeze, to whimper, to cower. Instead, she looked directly at him, and for a half-second he was confused by the utter lack of fear in her eyes. She took a shuffling, panicked step backward, her body language screaming terror, a perfect piece of misdirection. His focus shifted for a microsecond to his teammates behind him, a silent signal that they had a civilian witness. That microsecond was all she needed. She exploded forward. Her movement was not human. It was like the strike of a snake, a blur of white scrubs and focused intent. The feigned stumble transformed into a lunge. The trauma shears in her right hand flashed under the recessed lighting. She did not aim for his chest or his stomach. She drove the sharpened point of the shears directly into the side of his neck, just below the ear, sinking it deep into the soft tissue and severing the carotid artery. It was not a killing blow, not immediately. It was a disabling one. Blood erupted in a hot, pulsing spray. The man's eyes went wide with shock and agony, his hands flying to his neck as a gurgling sound escaped his lips. He staggered back, his weapon forgotten, and collapsed against the wall, leaving a thick, crimson smear on the beige paint. The other two reacted instantly, their professionalism overriding their shock. They dropped the laundry bags, the heavy canvas falling away to reveal short-barreled submachine guns, fitted with suppressors. The soft thump of the bags hitting the floor was followed by the metallic clack of safeties being disengaged. But Elara was already gone. She had used the momentum of her attack to pivot into an adjacent linen closet, the door swinging shut behind her. The second mercenary fired a controlled, 3-round burst into the closed door, the suppressed shots making a sound like a hard cough. Splinters erupted from the cheap wood, but the rounds passed through empty space. Inside the closet, Elara's mind was a supercomputer processing tactical data. 2 hostiles. Suppressed automatic weapons. Objective, General Valerius. Civilian exposure, minimal on the night shift, but Lance Corporal Evans was 2 doors down. Aldrich Thorne was cowering in his office at the end of the hall, having stayed late to finalize her termination paperwork. Her mission parameters were suddenly, brutally clear: neutralize the threat, protect the assets. She kicked open the closet's back panel, a maintenance access route she had noted during her first week on the job, and slipped into the dusty crawl space behind the wall. She emerged 30 feet down the hall, behind their position, from a similar panel marked electrical. The mercenaries were advancing cautiously on the linen closet, expecting her to be trapped. She moved with absolute silence, her every step placed with a dancer's precision. She grabbed the first thing she could find, a heavy, industrial floor-polishing machine parked in an alcove. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, she shoved it out into the middle of the corridor. It rolled forward, gathering momentum, and crashed directly into the legs of the rear mercenary. The man yelled out in pain and surprise as his knee buckled, the heavy machine pinning him against the opposite wall with a sickening crunch of bone. The last man spun around, his weapon tracking. He was good, his movements fluid and trained. He fired another burst, but he was shooting at a ghost. Elara was already moving, using the chaos as cover. She ducked into the open doorway of an empty patient room, the bullets peppering the wall where she had been a heartbeat before. The room's sole occupant was a crash cart left behind after a drill earlier in the day. Her eyes locked on the defibrillator. An idea, desperate and brilliant, formed in her mind. She grabbed the paddles, her fingers flying across the controls, charging the unit to its maximum setting of 360 joules. The machine emitted a high-pitched whine. The mercenary entered the room in a low crouch, his weapon sweeping the corners. He was cautious now, realizing he was not dealing with a nurse. He was dealing with a professional. He saw movement behind an overturned bed and raised his weapon. At that exact moment, Elara threw the charged defibrillator paddles. They sailed through the air, trailing their cables, and arced against the room's metal doorframe just as he passed through it. The resulting explosion of electricity was blinding. A shower of blue-white sparks erupted, and the mercenary screamed as thousands of volts coursed through his body. His muscles seized, his weapon clattering to the floor as he convulsed and collapsed, his body twitching, the air thick with the smell of ozone and burnt hair. Elara did not wait to see if he was dead. She moved past him and down the hall, her objective now singular: secure the general. But before she could reach his room, she had to pass the room of Lance Corporal Evans. She saw his door was ajar, his young, frightened face peering out. He had seen everything. His eyes, wide with a mixture of terror and awe, were locked on her. She paused, her hardened expression softening for just a fraction of a second. "Barricade your door," she ordered, her voice low and steady, a commander's voice. "Do it now, Marine." The use of his title, the sheer authority in her tone, snapped him out of his shock. He nodded dumbly and slammed the door shut. The sound of a heavy bedside table being dragged across the floor followed. The final threat was the man with the crushed leg. He was trying to drag himself upright, his face a mask of pain and fury, his hand reaching for his dropped submachine gun. Elara closed the distance in 3 silent strides. He looked up and saw her coming, a silent angel of death in white scrubs. He never had a chance to raise the weapon. Her foot came up and stamped down on his wrist, shattering the small bones with a dry snap. He howled in agony. She leaned down, her face inches from his, and her hand clamped over his mouth, silencing him. Her other hand moved to the base of his skull. There was a sharp, violent twist, a sound like thick branches breaking, and then he went limp. The entire engagement, from the first attack to the last, had taken less than 2 minutes. The corridor was a scene of utter carnage. One man was bleeding out against a wall, another lay twitching in a doorway, and the third was a lifeless heap next to a floor polisher. Overturned carts and medical debris littered the floor, and in the middle of it all stood Elara Vance, her breathing even, her stance relaxed. Her scrubs were torn and spattered with blood, but she seemed completely unharmed, an island of impossible calm in the center of a hurricane of violence. This was the scene that greeted Aldrich Thorne. He had heard the muffled commotion from his office and, assuming it was a patient having a hysterical fit, had emerged to restore order. He crept from behind the main reception desk, his eyes widening in abject horror. He saw the bodies. He saw the weapons. And he saw his quiet, problematic nurse standing over them. His mind simply could not process the information. His mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no sound came out. His world, a carefully ordered universe of spreadsheets and donor luncheons, had just been ripped apart by the woman he was about to fire for being too meek. At that moment, the door to General Valerius's room opened. The old soldier stood there, leaning heavily on his IV pole, his face pale from the effort. He had heard the suppressed shots, the screams, the thud of bodies hitting the floor. His instincts, honed over 50 years of warfare, had told him he was under attack. He had been preparing to make a last stand with a sharpened bedpan when the sounds of struggle had suddenly ceased. He looked out into the hallway, his eyes taking in the tableau of destruction. He saw the dead and wounded assassins. He saw the terrified administrator. And then he saw Nurse Vance. She turned to face him, the cold, hard mask of the warrior beginning to recede, replaced by a profound weariness. As she turned, the harsh fluorescent light from overhead caught the back of her right hand. She flexed her fingers, a subconscious check for injury, and the movement pulled the skin taut over a unique, jagged scar. It was a starburst of pale, raised tissue, no bigger than a silver dollar, a pattern as unique as a fingerprint. He'd been in that hospital 3 days before he looked at her hand. Then he went completely silent. The blood drained from General Valerius's face, his breath hitched in his chest. The IV pole slipped from his grasp and clattered to the floor. He didn't seem to notice. His eyes, wide with a disbelief so profound it bordered on religious awe, were locked on that scar. He had seen it only once before, a lifetime ago, in the chaotic, dust-choked aftermath of an ambush in a forgotten valley in Kandahar province. He had seen it on the hand of a ghost, a legend, a soldier who had saved his life and then vanished into the fire and smoke of a cleansing airstrike, a soldier who was supposed to be dead. His voice, when he finally found it, was not the bark of a general or the groan of a patient. It was a choked, reverent whisper, a name spoken into the sudden, ringing silence of the corridor. Spectre, he took a shaky step forward, his surgical staples groaning in protest. The ghost of Kandahar, my God. It is you. The name hung in the air, heavy and impossible. Aldrich Thorne stared, his mind reeling, trying to connect the mythical military call sign with the quiet nurse he had just tried to ruin. The doors at the end of the hall burst open, and hospital security, a pair of overweight men armed with flashlights and tasers, finally arrived, their faces slack with confusion. They were followed moments later by a team of 6 military police in full tactical gear, the general's external protection detail, who had been alerted by a silent panic signal from his room. They swept into the hall, weapons raised, shouting commands. "Stand down." The general's voice was no longer a whisper. It was a roar. It was the voice of command that had sent armies into battle, a sound of pure, unadulterated authority that cracked through the tension like a whip. The MPs froze instantly, their training overriding all other impulses. They lowered their rifles, their eyes darting between the general, the carnage, and the woman in the blood-stained scrubs. Valerius ignored them. His gaze was fixed on Thorne, who had begun to babble, his survival instincts kicking in, trying desperately to spin the narrative in his favor. "General, thank God. We were attacked. This nurse, she went berserk, but our security protocols, though momentarily breached, ultimately contained the situation. She neutralized them. It was chaos." He was trying to take credit, to frame the impossible event as a success of his administration. The look the general gave him was colder than the grave. "You will be silent," he commanded, and Thorne's mouth snapped shut. Valerius then turned his attention to the assembled MPs and the stunned hospital staff who were now peeking out from doorways. He drew himself up to his full height, the pain from his incision a distant, unimportant thing. He was no longer a patient. He was a commander delivering a battlefield citation. "You see this woman?" he began, his voice booming down the corridor, each word resonating with history and fury. "You see this nurse who you let a little man in a suit terrorize? Let me tell you who you are looking at." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. 10 years ago, during Operation Iron Serpent, my reconnaissance unit was ambushed deep in hostile territory. We were cut off, outnumbered 20 to 1. Our commander was killed in the first volley. We were all dead men. He took another painful step forward, his eyes never leaving Elara's face. She stood perfectly still, her expression unreadable, a statue carved from ice. For 72 hours, one soldier held them off. A single operator, codenamed Spectre. We never knew her real name. She was a phantom attached to our unit, a specialist. She turned that valley into a killing field. She set traps, treated the wounded with nothing but a combat knife and a prayer, called in targeting data on a radio with a failing battery. She dragged me and 4 other men to cover when a mortar round landed in our position. He raised a trembling hand and pointed to the scar on her right hand. "That scar," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "came from the same piece of shrapnel that is still lodged 2 inches from my spine. She pushed me out of the blast radius and took the brunt of it herself. On the 3rd day, with our position about to be overrun, she did the unthinkable. She called in an airstrike. On her own position. A danger close fire mission to wipe out the enemy forces that were swarming us." His voice cracked. "We were airlifted out during the chaos. We watched the bombs fall. No one could have survived it. We thought she was gone, vaporized for our sake. Her name, or rather her call sign, was carved onto a memorial wall in Fort Bragg. We named a covert operations medal after her, the Spectre Star, an award for valor so extreme it has never been given, because no one has ever measured up to what she did." A collective gasp went through the onlookers. Thorne's face had turned a pasty, sickly white. The MPs stared at Elara, who was now, clearly, Major Elena Vancroft, with a reverence usually reserved for deities. The general's gaze swung back to Thorne, and all the warmth, all the emotion, vanished, replaced by a glacial fury. "You," he snarled, the single word dripping with a universe of contempt. "You dared to discipline this woman. You threatened the career of a national hero. You stood in this hallway and belittled a soldier who has sacrificed more for her country than you could possibly comprehend in your pathetic, money-grubbing life." He gestured to the dead mercenaries. "This was a targeted assassination attempt, you fool, and your 5-star security was non-existent. The only thing that stood between me and a body bag was her." Major Elena Vancroft. He turned to the lead MP. "Lieutenant, this entire facility is now a federal crime scene. This hospital's government contracts, particularly those related to veteran care, are under immediate and indefinite review. And you," he said, his voice dropping to a lethal calm as he locked eyes with Thorne again, "are relieved of your position. Consider your career, and likely your freedom, to be over." He jerked his chin towards the administrator. "Place Mr. Thorne under arrest. Criminal negligence, conspiracy, endangering a protected federal asset. I don't care what the charge is. Get him out of my sight." 2 MPs moved forward, grabbing Thorne by the arms. His face crumpled, the arrogant mask dissolving into one of pure, panicked terror. "No. You can't. I'm the administrator. I have rights. He shrieked as they dragged him away, his expensive shoes squeaking pathetically on the marble floor. His protests faded down the hall, leaving behind a stunned, profound silence. In the aftermath, the power dynamic of the entire hospital had been irrevocably shattered. The nurses, doctors, and staff who had worked alongside Elara for months looked at her now as if she were a complete stranger. They saw not the quiet, efficient nurse, but the living legend the general had described. They saw the lethal grace in her stance, the profound depth in her weary eyes. Down the hall, the door to Lance Corporal Evans's room opened again. The young Marine, using the wall for support, struggled to his one remaining leg. With a grimace of pain and effort, he pulled himself to the position of attention and rendered the sharpest, most heartfelt salute of his life. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with awe. Slowly, like the start of a deep rumble, one of the MPs began to clap. Then another. Then the nurses, and even the security guards. The hallway filled with a wave of thunderous applause, a spontaneous, overwhelming tribute to the quiet hero who had walked silently among them. Alina Van Croft, formerly Elara Vance, did not smile. She did not acknowledge the applause. She simply gave a short, almost imperceptible nod to the young Marine, a sign of mutual respect between warriors. Then she looked at General Valerius, and in that silent gaze, a decade of unspoken history passed between them. It was a look of shared pain, of profound loss, and of a bond forged in the crucible of combat. A new team arrived, men and women in discreet, dark suits, who moved with the same quiet, deadly purpose she did. They were from her old world, the world she had tried so desperately to leave behind. One of them, a woman with a severe haircut and intelligent eyes, stepped forward and held out a simple black coat. "It's time to come home, Major," she said softly. Alina slipped the coat on over her tattered, bloody scrubs. It covered the uniform of the life she had built, a life of quiet healing, and replaced it with the shroud of the life she had been born to, a life of necessary violence. She turned and, without a word or a backward glance, walked away, flanked by her new escort. They did not treat her as a colleague. They treated her as a recovered asset, a weapon being returned to its rightful place in the arsenal. She disappeared down the corridor, leaving behind a legend reborn and a hospital forever changed by the storm that had passed through it. The story of that night would become a whispered myth within the walls of Sterling Vanguard, a cautionary tale for the arrogant and a source of inspiration for the overlooked. It served as a stark reminder that the world is full of quiet heroes, their greatness hidden not by capes and masks, but by the simple uniforms of ordinary lives. They walk among us, their battles fought in silence, their medals of honor not forged from metal and ribbon, but etched into their very skin as scars, permanent, painful reminders of the price they paid to keep the rest of us safe. One should be careful then of judging the book by its cover, for the quietest person in the room is sometimes the one who has screamed the loudest in the storm.